Welcome everyone to this episode of Office Hours. Today we're going to speak about boosting your cash flow, why you need an RCM Health Check. So we're thrilled to have Chuck Rackley with us today. He's our Chief Strategy Officer here at Infinx to join us. He does a lot of these, and so it just seemed reasonable to bring him on and explain this and give a good insight on exactly what the benefits are. So how are you doing today, Chuck?
Doing fantastic, Stuart. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well, I can't complain yet, but it's early. So, the day's not over, but
There you go.
I'm more of a positive guy. I think it's going to stay good all day long. So just to kind of give some background on why we thought this was important, particularly for this episode, is just like anything that you want to check, like the health of your bodies. You go to the doctor if you want to check out your car, you go to a mechanic. You go to the vet if you want your pets to be checked out as well. Even during this hot summer where we're having record heat, across the country, people are checking their air conditioning systems, right?
Mhm.
And typically it's when things go wrong, people want to come in and say, hey, I have a problem. Help me out with this problem. And sometimes it's not necessarily too late, but sometimes you need to buy a whole new car or get a whole new air conditioning system. So you don't want to wait that long. So it's very likely the same way with assessing the health of your RCM. Oftentimes, checking the health of your RCM falls to the wayside because everyone's just so heads down. We're all so busy. Everyone has their processes, everyone has their routines. You got to get claims out the door. There's a lot of backup going on, a lot of aging going on. And so you're following that process. You don't have a lot of time to just kind of stop and think, is this all working correctly? You really want to make sure that you do that to ensure that everything is running very smoothly, that there aren't any issues. Like, for instance, when you go to the doctor, you have fever, you have a symptoms, you go to the doctor. Um, but you want to just have that routine checkup, so to speak, because there may be some underlying things you're not aware of. So it's very important to take the time, for what we like to call an RCM health check. It's just as important as looking at your personal health check or any of those other things that I mentioned before. So in this session, again, that's why we brought Chuck along to kind of share some of the insights on why an RCM health check is crucial for maintaining your financial stability. Also, how easily is an RCM health check can be implemented with minimum disruption to your daily operations. And also, what are the expectations? What are some of the results that you can look forward to, including increased cash flow as well as reduced denials? So before we get started, I want to remind everyone that we will have a Q&A session at the end. So I encourage you all to put in your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll be happy to answer those as we can get to them. So Chuck, you ready? Dive
Good.
into all this? Okay, so I would just want to ask some questions and keeping this more as conversational. But right out the gate, what exactly is an RCM health check? And how does it differ from some of the other type of financial assessments that so many
Sure.
of us have been aware of?
Yeah, so an RCM health check, or some people might call it a diagnostic health check, it's really a data-focused assessment. So what we're doing there is looking at several different components of the revenue cycle from a couple different lenses. So really trying to look at both the income statement side of the business and the balance sheet side of the business. From the income statement side, we really focus on a couple main KPIs. So obviously we're looking at things like your gross revenue, your net revenue, bad debt expense, cash, point of service collections, those kind of things that are mainly on the income statement. And then another one of those is denial write-offs will be there as well. On the balance sheet side, we're really looking at what is there from an AR acceleration perspective, mostly around AR aging. So your Medicare through all your different commercials, patient aging, and looking at how it's aging against the date of service. So is it aging 60 out, 90 out, 180? And then finally, looking at the incoming denials. We kind of do a marrying job between what's in denial status, what's in AR status, what's unresponded, and really it gives us a pretty good picture of what is out there going on inside your organization.
Awesome, awesome. And so you heard my rant at the beginning about why it was important for
Sure.
conducting a health check such as this. But I want to get your point of view on that.
Yeah.
So why it's absolutely essential for healthcare
Yeah.
practices to regularly perform an RCM health check.
Well, I think the analogy you mentioned towards the end there on the importance of getting your own health checked is really important. And the thing that really struck home to me, being guilty of this myself, is I usually don't go to the doctor unless something's really hurting. Like, and it's pulling teeth to get me to go to the annual wellness visit. My wife would tell you. But the same thing applies here. Most of the time, people come to us in a panic, or they're really hurting from a balance sheet perspective, or they got aging going crazy, or their CFO's on them for cash, and that's when they usually come to us for help. We call them hand raisers. They come in, I've got this problem. Can you help me fix it? And obviously, like you said, if it's getting to the point where you're noticing it, it's probably too late. It's
Right,
too late to be proactive. It's not the end of the world. Obviously, we can always turn things around. But typically, what surprises people the most is when we do one of these health checks on what they thought was a healthy revenue cycle, and we find several systemic things that are under the covers there. And that's the thing that really was I identified with in your analogy there was how many times has people gone to a health, a annual checkup, and they find some debilitating disease that they need to kind of get in front of? Same thing
mhm,
happens with RCM health checks all the time. So I can't tell you how many times we found a no auth issue, a coding issue, a payer that's underpaying on a consistent basis, or we find docs that are really delinquent in their charting. So and all these things are very findable, but like you said, we're also busy just drinking from the fire hose that a lot of the
right,
kind of nuanced stuff passes you.
right,
Make sense?
right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah, because you can be hyper focused in the moment and hyper
sure.
focused in the process where it becomes task oriented. It's hard to get that analysis and see, well, where are we, and where can
Hmm.
improvements can be. And you had mentioned earlier, when in describing what the health check really is, and some of the things that were required. You touched on some of the data points like a balance sheet,
Hmm.
maybe some claims, maybe some 835s.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little more on what some of the common, what steps for this typical process in conducting the RCM health check? What are those main steps? Can you walk us through that
Sure.
for us?
So what we typically do is supply a pretty standard data request. So it's going to go through all those points. For the age trial balance, the ATB, what we typically do is we say, give us the current one, and we'll show you all the different fields. There's probably 50 fields that we like to get. Everything from, dates of service, diagnosis codes, procedure codes, CPTs, denial codes, all those things that you would need for an aging. We'll tell you how to get that. We'll also look at the 835s. We'll usually look at a year's worth of 835s, and that's for everyone. That's the payer responses that you're getting after a claim submission. The payer responds back, and it'll tell you, "Yep, you're good to go. We're going to pay you," or "No, we're not going to pay you, and here's why." And as you know, Stuart, that here's why comes back in that CARC and RARC code, and just kind of the description of here's why we're not going to pay you. And then the outside of that, we're also going to ask for some payment files that come along with that. So everyone's seen kind of that. I call it the waterfall analysis, where it kind of looks like a reverse triangle, so you can see how payments are coming through the system. So that way we can really ascertain how you're getting paid on uh, what kind of timeline you're usually getting paid. So how long it takes these things to come through the system. So marrying all that up, like I said before, between how you're getting bills out the door, what are the responses coming back, and looking at what your overall opportunity is to close the gap on best practice.
Awesome, awesome. And so you touched on also how when you do this, what's common, and I found this too, with any other analysis that I've been a part of, typically it's like, oh, everything's good, we're where we need to be, everything's normal. But there are some issues that you find underlying that they are like,
Mhm.
oh, wow, that can't be us. Because when it's their data, they can't argue against their data.
Right.
And when you're revealing that and you're looking at some of those common issues and efficiencies, um, can you speak to some of those that we've actually seen with some
Sure.
of our clients where we've uncovered some of those issues and inefficiencies?
Yeah. A couple things that come to mind immediately. Probably the most common one is where we find big pockets of AR denials that are being ignored. And it may not manifest itself, super obviously. So, as for example, let's say that an organization had an over 90 percentage that was really good. Let's say it was 18, 19%, and it was below industry standard, and they think everything's fine. But what they don't see under the covers there is that all the secondary accounts and all the accounts less than $100 are starting to pile up. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden you've got 10,000 accounts that are less than $100 and they're just a pain in the neck to go and get. Some people aren't even aware they're out there. So they're kind of looking just at the dollar amounts on these agings and then not really looking at the count and then the bifurcation, stratification on the balances. The other thing that I found really interesting is, when we have these conversations with clients and we'll say, hey, how are you doing it on cash as a percent of goal? Or how are you doing on AR over 90 or, denial write-offs as a percent of net revenue? We'll start to ask these questions. And I'll tell you the response I get the most often is, I don't really track that. I'd probably have to go
Oh,
look.
wow. Wow.
And it's not that these people are great operators, but like we talked about, they have their eye on the ball of just cash coming in the door and making sure it's consistent. But what's
Mhm.
really important in this health check is to put things in context. So yeah, here's all the numbers. Everyone can probably pull their numbers, but what they have trouble doing is putting it in context. So if I'm missing cash, if I'm going along in cash here and I have a dip, some people, rightfully so, they panic. It's like, what's going on with cash? But are we missing uh, gross revenue from the previous month? Was there a claim issue the previous month? The bank days go up and down. So there's lots of different things that we need to keep in mind when we put those things in context. But that's really the biggest thing is they're looking at these numbers out of context. So it looks like a good number or it looks like a bad number. Sometimes it may not be.
Right, right, exactly. And particularly the aging, because I
Oh yeah.
mean, we've done a couple episodes and I've spoken before about the fact that typically, and I kind of call it the lazy man's response is we're just going to write it off once it gets
Hmm.
to 120 days. And so when you brought up the write off, it kind of triggered in my head. I was like, what opportunities they are there, but they just can't get to it. In other words, they may have this huge, I mean, millions and millions of dollars that are aging 120 days. It's just being written off for whatever reason. Um, this health check is not just something where they can just, okay, how do you fix this? They can't just, they're not just all up by themselves. We're not going to say, here's your report.
Hmm.
We're also going to offer some kind of treatment plan, right? In
Sure.
essence.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure. So on a typical health check, what we'll do is we'll obviously share all the data backwards to them, make it very manipulable so they can see all of what we did and they tie out to it. That's a very important process is that we do a big reconciliation with them to make sure our number matches your number and we're all reading from the same hymnal. But
mhm,
after that's done, what we'll do is we'll have our observations, obviously, then recommendations on what to do. So if we find, hey, your no authorizations are out of whack, also your MedNest, and we may suggest, okay, let's come up with a denial plan for denial reduction. Here's how to attack this from a front office perspective. Here's some things you can change from patient intake. Really be talking to your patient access people about getting the right eligibility
mhm,
information, and in some cases, we can even offer our products or services if it matches. We're
mhm,
not obviously tied to that. So we're just trying to make our providers better. If we've got something that can help, of course, we're going to suggest it. But in many cases, it's something that they can just fix themselves. And obviously, we'll say that whenever available.
right. Awesome. Awesome. So obviously, from my experience, and I've been dealing with this, and I can just hear practice administrators, CFOs, that would be keen on doing this.
Hmm.
It's like, oh well, okay, what disruption am I going to have to my processes, my operations for this? I mean, I hear pulling data, gathering data,
Mhm.
how can I minimize that disruption in this
Yeah,
process?
it's a pretty common question. So there's a couple different flavors of health check we can offer. So there's one that's very arduous. Arduous is not the right word. It's much more complete. It's many years of data together, lots of transactions going back and forth. And those can take a little while to pull. Or we can, make it much more simple. We can simplify the whole process and get, single files here and there, and then that'll help us point to a specific spot that we want to go dive deeper in. So we can either start with that full Monty, or we can kind of start slower on a couple different files and then get much more granular when we find a good thread to pull. So those typically are much simpler to put into action. They're simple data pulls that you do all the time anyway. So that will take usually a couple days maximum is what we've seen when people go pull this data. And then it takes us a couple weeks to churn through it, and then we can report back with our observations or recommendations within the month. So it's fairly non-invasive on both accounts, but just one is much more complete than the other.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Awesome. Awesome. So, and I guess you're referring to that there's the RCM health check, which is what we're leading with here today. And that's the
Right.
more long-term one. But then there's also something that we've coined quick health check,
Right.
which is a little less evasive. So awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So from a financial improvement standpoint,
Hmm.
um, and also any other benefits beyond financial improvement, because I think everyone zeroes in on revenue, but
Hmm.
also FTE count, also time spent by those FTEs on certain tasks. That helps with the bottom line, basically. So what kind of financial improvements can a practice expect after
Yeah.
implementing the recommendations from an RCM health check?
Yeah. So when we talk about revenue, let's dive into that just for a second. So when people
Right.
talk about net revenue improvement after a big transformation, it's a misconception that if I just change these things, my revenue will improve. There's only a couple things that actually make revenue go up. So you can either do more stuff, you can charge more completely for it,
Mhm.
but the revenue is the revenue. So it's you can do like a CDI engagement to improve your diagnosis, whether it's inpatient or outpatient. You can do these things, but just to say, if you just do these things, your revenue will improve. It's a little misleading that a lot
Right.
of advisors say. So that's why we put these things into two sections of benefit: the income statement and then the balance sheet. So on the balance sheet side is what we say it's one-time cash acceleration. So for example, if your AR over 90 is $2 million over where it should be, and we show you if you get this down to 22% over 90, it represents a one-time balance sheet improvement of $2 million. But
Mhm.
on the other side of that coin, if you eliminate these write-offs and bring this down to 1% of net revenue or some percentage of gross revenue, that's a recurring benefit. That's a much better type, right? So if we can
Right.
eliminate bad debt adjustment, we can eliminate denial write-off, we can increase our point of service collection. Those things are all that are going to be recurring, and you'll feel that on your P&L for a long time. On the balance sheet side, you kind of get one pop, and then you kind of maintain where you are. So it's important to break those two down. And so that way, when you're talking to your people about here's what to expect from this, they don't have in their mind, I'm just going to increase revenue by 10%. That's usually not what happens. What
Right.
happens more often is that we get what we should have gotten all along. And then usually we can improve some small things that will help you enhance your revenue instead of just increasing it by 10%. Usually, if someone's guaranteeing you they can increase your revenue by 10% by doing something, be a little wary unless it's
Right.
it's very prescriptive on what you're missing from a charge capture or CDI perspective.
Right. Indeed. Indeed. And it's really the difference between what you earn versus profitability.
Correct.
Profitability speaks to, what are you being, what are your accounts going out? What are you paying? What are you paying this FTE? What are
Hmm.
you paying vendors for subscriptions? Whatever your outgoing is. If you can help mitigate that along with some of the revenue increases that you were just speaking to, then it just speaks to combined profitability. I think those are definitely, as you will put, two different things in and
Yeah,
of
and
itself.
you just reminded me of something else. So the third kind of leg to that stool would be your FTE usage. So a lot of people forget to do this. So let's say you have 10,000 accounts in your ATB and you know you need X amount of people to go look at it. If we can bring that down to 3,000, you can either restaff those people to go do something else, or you can riff them completely and have an FTE savings. So
Right.
there's a lot of that that gets forgotten
Mhm.
inside of the benefit analysis.
Right. And even to flip that, I mean, because, we just did, I think what we hear also is there's still a shortage of
Hmm.
staff out there, that
Almost
people trying
always.
to look for staff. So this could actually help you, prevent or stop looking for additional staff, because now
Hmm.
you don't need it anymore, because now you're being more efficient with the staff you have,
For sure.
even though that revenue's increased. Awesome, awesome. So, that's basically the end, unless you have any further thoughts before we go to questions. If there was anything that we forgot to
Yeah.
allude on. Um,
I think my final statement here is like just like we started, whether you do this with us or you do it with another firm or do it internally, the point is here is to get a cadence going so where you look at this stuff more regularly rather than just when it hurts. So
right.
set up that cadence to look at how are we doing on cash as a percent of goal? How are we setting that cash goal? How does our balance sheet look? Are those coming down? Are they going up? What's my opportunity? Look at that weekly, monthly, quarterly, and
Mhm.
not just when it hurts.
Yeah, yeah. And you also, and that kind of reminds me too, because I always preach this, is you got to have collaboration, regular meetings regarding this, go in
Mhm.
with intent, be intentional. And walk away from those meetings with everyone having a clear understanding that these are the goals that you just mentioned. And really take an honest look, a candid look, as a collectively as a group, and hold each other accountable. And it may require some education. Those tend to be a theme every time I speak on any given subject, whether it's E&M coding improvement or prior auth improvement, whatever the case may be. It's meet regular meetings, collaboration, collections, break out of the silos. And because it does involve more than just the back end team that's handling denials, or it involves the charge capture team, it involves the providers, it involves those patient access teams, the intake teams. So to me, that's also key too, is not only doing this check regularly like you mentioned, but also share this knowledge and hold each other accountable for it.
Right on.
So now we're going to open up for questions. So again, I just want to remind everyone, if you would, go ahead and put some questions in the Q&A. We'll be happy to get to them as time allows. We do have a few questions that have come in, Chuck, that seem to be pretty obvious. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but the question is, how long does a typical health check take?
Yeah. So let's talk about both flavors. So the full RCM health check, that the data usually takes about a week and a half, 2 weeks to pull from the client side. We need another 2 weeks to churn that through, and then probably a week or so on observations or recommendations. So about a month and a half is the typical from very start to the very end of that is what you can expect.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's shorter or longer just based on the size and complexity of the provider itself, but that's a good idea of what to see there.
Awesome,
And
awesome.
then on the quick health check side, much faster. So usually it's a couple days on a data pull. We ask for a week for our analysis and churning through that, and then we'll get back to you the next week. So you're in a 2 to 3 week time period, probably closer to 2 weeks for most providers on the quick health check. So much different, like we talked about in scale and completeness, but it's a good way to kind of kickstart and really figure out where you want to start looking next.
Perfect, perfect. And then as a follow-up question, and what is the cost?
Oh, the cost. The
Yes,
cost is
that's
the
very
best part.
important.
So the
Yeah,
cost is the best part. So again, let's break that into two flavors. So the quick health check that we've been talking about, that is free of charge. That is something we do for most of our clients, free of charge, and even some uh, prospective clients we've been known to do that in the past. So it really just depends on the person if we're going to do that and what the provider's needs are. But for the quick health check, it's usually free. For the full RCM health check, there's a little data crunching behind the scenes. There's some IT costs for us. So we do ask for a pretty nominal fee there. Usually it's around $10,000 for that first initial health check, or and sometimes it can be less. But the good news is if you buy something else on the back end of that, or if it leads to some other product or services being purchased, we always credit that back. So there's very
Mhm.
little risk to it in order to get going.
Right. Sounds good. Sounds good. And so the last question is, well, how does one get started? I think that question is probably from someone who's gotten started with other projects, and it's been a heavy lift. But if you could just
Sure.
explain real quick.
Well, I assume you mean my immediate answer to that is, why don't you pick up the phone and give me a ring? And that
Right.
would be the first
Exactly.
thing.
Answer us.
Yeah,
I probably
that would
could
be the
answer
first thing.
that. You could,
Yeah.
yeah. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to get you started.
Yeah. Reach out, email or phone, and we're happy to walk you through. It's a very non-invasive process. We can get you in the queue and moving very quickly. So don't hesitate just to reach out to us.
Right, right. Yeah. So you can go to our website. You can also, we have many ways in which you can fill out a contact form or request a demo. We'll be happy to walk you through, if it kind of give you kind of a flavor of what you can expect in a demo process. You can also call me or Chuck, either one of us, get in touch with us through our website as well. There's phone numbers there. We'll be happy to speak to you and get you in touch with the right people and get that process going. All right.
Absolutely.
So with that, I think that wraps things up. Chuck, it's always good to have you on.
Sure.
We'll have you on more, believe me. So thank you for being with us today, and I'll really appreciate everyone who has attended as well. If you have any other further questions after we end this call, you can also reach out to us with additional questions regarding this episode or anything else. We'll be happy to answer them for you. So thanks everyone for attending.
Nice to see you guys.